Welcome to our channel. Today, we discuss one of the most urgent and profound issues facing humanity: why climate refugees in the 2090s will number in the billions. This is a topic that might sound like science fiction, but when you dig into the science, the social implications, the political realities, and the human stories behind climate displacement, you realize we are on a trajectory that demands our full attention. So let's walk through this topic in depth, building our understanding piece by piece, in a smooth and engaging way that connects big picture forces with real world consequences. Imagine the year 2090. You may picture flying cars or cities on Mars, but there's something far more grounded, yet far more urgent, shaping life on Earth. Rising seas, scorching heat waves, shifting rainfall, dying crops, and unprecedented storms are not distant predictions, they are already happening in many parts of the world. What if I told you that these forces will shape not just weather reports or policy debates, but the very movement of billions of people? Let's begin by understanding what we mean by climate refugee. Traditionally, a refugee is defined under international law as someone who has fled their country due to persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. But climate change adds a new dimension. People displaced by rising seas, droughts that turn fertile lands into dust bowls, or unbearable heat waves are not fleeing persecution in the traditional sense. They are fleeing the loss of livable conditions. And while international law does not yet fully recognize climate refugees, the reality on the ground is undeniable. People are already migrating because of climate stress. In the early decades of the 21st century, we saw millions displaced by hurricanes in the Caribbean, floods in South Asia, wildfires in Australia and California. These events were regional and devastating, but in the 2090s, the scale will be dramatically larger. Why? Because climate change is not a series of isolated anomalies, it is a global transformation of Earth's systems. The planet's average temperature is rising, polar ice is melting, and ocean levels are climbing. These changes may seem gradual, but their effects compound over time, especially in parts of the world where people depend on stable climates for food, water, and homes. Let's talk about sea level rise. Much of the world's population lives near coastlines, cities like Mumbai, Shanghai, Lagos, Miami. As ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica melt, sea levels rise. Even relatively small increases in sea level can turn regular high tides into daily flooding. Low-lying islands in the Pacific may become uninhabitable. Bangladesh, with its dense population, could see tens of millions forced inland as storm surges swallow farmland and freshwater sources become contaminated with saltwater. When homes are lost to encroaching seas and fertile fields turn to marshlands, displacement becomes inevitable. People will have to move, not just temporarily, but permanently. And this brings us to one of the key drivers of future climate migration: loss of habitable land. But it is not only rising waters that displace people. Rising temperatures themselves make places unlivable. Think about regions that are already hot, like the Sahel in Africa, the Middle East, and parts of South Asia. Today, heat waves are dangerous, but by the 2090s, extreme heat could become the norm in summer months, pushing temperatures beyond what the human body can safely endure without constant access to cooling and medical care. When heat reaches critical thresholds, agriculture collapses, water resources shrink, and mortality rates climb. In such conditions, communities must move or risk widespread suffering. This mass movement will not happen in neat, orderly waves. It will be chaotic. Families will leave small towns, entire communities will seek refuge in cities already struggling with infrastructure. Some will cross borders, moving from one country into another, sparking political tensions, creating humanitarian crises, and forcing nations to reconsider what it means to be a host for displaced populations. To understand the potential scale of climate displacement by 2090, we must also consider water scarcity. Many regions rely on glacial meltwater for drinking water and irrigation. In the Himalayas, Andes, and Alps, glaciers are retreating. At first, melting ice may increase river flows, but eventually, the glaciers shrink to the point where they no longer provide consistent water. When rivers run dry or become unpredictable, crops fail, livestock perish, and families face stark choices about survival. Water wars, internal conflict, and economic collapse can follow. When water can no longer sustain a community, the only option is to leave. Now, let's think about food insecurity. Agriculture is highly sensitive to climate conditions. Crops that thrived under a century of stable weather patterns may no longer grow in familiar regions. Wheat, rice, corn, staples of the global diet, are threatened by heat stress, drought, floods, and shifting pest populations. In the 2090s, we may see breadbasket regions producing far less than they do today. When local food production collapses, people must move to areas where food and work are available, but climate change doesn't affect every region equally. Wealthier nations may have the resources to adapt, building seawalls, developing heat-resistant crops, investing in desalination plants. Poorer nations, particularly those in tropical and subtropical zones, have fewer resources to adapt. This means that climate impacts will disproportionately affect those who are least equipped to respond. We already see early signs of this pattern. In places like the Horn of Africa, drought-driven famine has forced families to trek miles for water. In Central America's dry corridor, prolonged drought and crop failure have pushed people toward the U.S. border. These early movements are a glimpse of what's to come, but let's be clear, when we talk about billions of climate refugees by the 2090s, we are talking about a scale of human movement that is unprecedented in history. World population is expected to continue growing, particularly in regions that are most vulnerable to climate change. If current climate trajectories continue, tens of millions could be displaced by mid-century, and by the late 2090s, that figure could reach into the billions. The dynamics of migration are complex. Some people will move short distances, seeking refuge in nearby cities or towns. Others will embark on longer journeys, crossing borders and continents. And for the first time on this scale, climate will be the primary driver of displacement, outstripping war, persecution, and economic migration. This leads us to the question of global response. Are nations preparing for this reality? Some are taking steps, but globally, the infrastructure and legal frameworks to support climate refugees are insufficient. The 1951 Refugee Convention does not cover climate displacement, leaving millions without clear protections under international law. Humanitarian agencies are struggling to scale up responses to current crises, let alone the exponential increases on the horizon. Imagine coastal megacities inundated with migrants from sinking islands, parched hinterlands, and collapsed rural economies. The strain on housing, jobs, healthcare, and social services would be immense. Tensions could rise between host communities and newcomers, especially if resources are already scarce. Without forward-looking policies, what begins as survival-driven movement could escalate into conflict. But let's also talk about human resilience and innovation. People are not passive victims. Around the world, communities are adapting in creative ways. Farmers are adopting drought-resistant crops, architects are designing floating homes. Cities are investing in green infrastructure. These innovations can reduce displacement pressure and, in some cases, help communities stay in place. Yet, adaptation has limits. When the basic elements of life, land, water, climate, are fundamentally altered, the choice to stay becomes a matter of life and death. Another important factor is economic inequality. Wealthier individuals may be able to relocate with relative ease, securing housing and jobs in safer regions. But for the poor, migration is risky. It often means leaving behind social support networks, cultural roots, and economic means. Climate displacement can deepen global inequality, creating new divides between those who can adapt and those who cannot. By the 2090s, entire regions may undergo demographic transformation. Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, the Middle East, parts of Latin America all face significant climate risks. If migration flows intensify from these regions, the cultural and economic fabric of societies will change. Host nations will need to rethink immigration policy, labor markets, and international cooperation. So, what does a world with billions of climate refugees look like? It's not a single moment or event, it's a mosaic of continuous movement as weather extremes become more frequent and severe. It's families making impossible decisions, stay and risk drought and starvation, or leave behind everything they know. It's cities that swell beyond their capacity, as rural communities empty out. It's borders being tested, and international law struggling to catch up. At the same time, this future could also see remarkable acts of solidarity. Nations collaborating on resettlement programs, investing in climate adaptation in vulnerable regions, advancing technologies that mitigate climate impacts. It will require visionary leadership and shared responsibility. Because climate change does not respect borders. An extreme heat wave in Pakistan, a hurricane in the Caribbean, drought in the Horn of Africa, these aren't isolated phenomena, they are interconnected signals. Now let's consider how individuals can help shape this future. Awareness is the first step. When we understand the scale and drivers of climate displacement, we can advocate for policies that protect vulnerable communities. Supporting sustainable practices, reducing carbon footprints, pushing for investment in climate adaptation, these might seem incremental, but collective action matters. The choices we make today ripple forward. For younger generations especially, the stakes are personal. The world you inherit will be shaped by how we respond to climate change now. Educating yourself, supporting climate justice movements, and engaging in civic action can make a difference. Because the alternative, a world where billions are displaced inland and across borders, is not a passive inevitability. It is the outcome of choices we make collectively. As we draw closer to the conclusion, it is important to reflect on the human dimension of this issue. Behind every statistic is a person, a farmer watching crops fail, a child waking up to hotter temperatures year after year, a family forced to leave ancestral land. Climate refugees are not abstract concepts, they are mothers, fathers, children, elders. Their stories will shape the 21st century just as migration has shaped every century before. So what is our takeaway? The number of climate refugees in the 2090s could reach into the billions because the Earth's climate system is changing in ways that will make large swaths of the planet increasingly difficult to inhabit. Rising sea levels, extreme heat, water scarcity, failing agriculture, economic instability, these forces will push people to move in search of safety and livelihood. The scale of this movement will challenge existing legal frameworks, social systems, and global cooperation. Yet, it will also test our capacity for compassion and collective action. We stand at a crossroads. One path leads to reactive crisis management, overwhelmed borders, and social strife. The other path leads to proactive adaptation, international solidarity, and systems that respect human dignity and rights. Which path we follow depends on decisions made today, tomorrow, and in the years to come. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of the most consequential topics of our time. If this video resonated with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think the future holds? How should the world prepare for climate displacement? Your voice matters in this conversation, and we want to hear from you. Until next time, stay informed, stay compassionate, and stay engaged.